America Looks Abroad, presented at this hour on Sunday afternoon by the officers and staff members of the Foreign Policy Association. This nonpartisan organization, which is open to all who are interested, offers accurate information on current world events. On January the 26th, the Japanese-American Trade Treaty will be abrogated. Mr. A. Randall Elliott speaks this afternoon for Mr. T. A. Bisson, the member of the research staff who follows Far Eastern affairs. He will discuss the situation in the Far East as it may be affected by the expiration of this treaty. Mr. Elliott.
Good afternoon. This coming Friday, the Japanese-American Trade Treaty, which Secretary Hull officially terminated last July 26th, will expire. Many persons throughout the country are asking what this will mean in terms of our relations with Japan. What will happen after the treaty lapses? Will a new treaty be concluded with Japan in the near future? Will some temporary arrangement be made that will assure continuance of most favored nation treatment to Japan? Or will the United States take steps to halt the sale to Japan of scrap iron, aviation gasoline, and other materials essential for war purposes? It should be noted in the first place that expiration of the treaty does not carry with it any automatic penalties. For a period of several years, not so long ago, this country had no trade treaty with France, but normal commercial relations were maintained under the ordinary provisions of domestic and international law. Abrogation of the Japanese-American Trade Treaty, therefore, does not mean that the United States has started economic discrimination against Japan. It will not automatically raise tariffs on imports from Japan. It will not automatically restrict the export of American goods to Japan. It will not cause any change in the treatment accorded Japanese subjects in the United States or Japanese ships coming into our ports. It does mean that the United States has taken an important preparatory step looking toward any or all of these actions. By abrogating the trade treaty, the United States has achieved a position under international law from which it can take measures designed to halt Japan's violation of American treaty rights. In order to institute such measures, however, affirmative action would have to be taken by President Roosevelt or Congress. From present indications, it does not seem likely that penalties will be imposed on Japan immediately after January 26th. Neither Congress nor the President is likely to take precipitate action. Senator Pittman indicated yesterday that passage of his embargo measure would depend on State Department approval. There is still time for calm deliberation as to the wisest course to follow under the existing circumstances. The national debate which has been proceeding over this question with growing intensity during the past year or so will undoubtedly continue. It should be carried on with an even keener sense of responsibility, owing to the fact that the time for a decision one way or another has moved appreciably closer. Before considering the issues involved in this debate, we might take a brief look at recent developments in the struggle between Japan and China. A week ago, the Japanese cabinet resigned. It had held office for only 4.5 months. What lay behind this change of government? The new Prime Minister, Admiral Yanai, is known as a moderate, and one of his chief aims is to adjust relations with the United States. But the former Premier, General Abe, was also a moderate, and took office with the same announced purposes. The new cabinet, in fact, has not changed the foreign policies of the old government at all. Japan has given up none of its basic claims in China. Admiral Yanai officially declares that the national policy has been immutably fixed. Its goal, he says, is establishment of the new order in East Asia. From this standpoint, he will seek to readjust relations with foreign powers. Then why did General Abe's cabinet resign? The actual reasons are of an internal character. After 30 months of war, shortages of necessities and the rise in living costs began to present serious difficulties. Last fall, a crisis developed over a rice shortage, caused by crop failure in Korea and reduced yields in Japan. Extensive hoarding of rice occurred, and black market selling above the official price went on. In its handling of this situation, the cabinet committed a blunder. It had stated that the official price would not be increased. Then, on November 6th, it suddenly raised the fixed price from 38 to 43 yen, or over 5 yen on the 5-bushel unit. Most of the farmers had already sold their crops, so the rice dealers pocketed the gain. Shortages have also developed in other mass consumption commodities, notably charcoal, the ordinary heating fuel in Japan. These economic grievances received political expression on December 27th, when a majority of the Diet members presented a non-confidence petition to General Abe. Even the army leaders were concerned. They advised General Abe to resign in order to avoid renewed popular agitation when the Diet reassembled on January 20th. It is generally expected that the new cabinet will seek means to lighten the irksome economic control restrictions and improve living conditions. How to do this without jeopardizing the war effort presents a dilemma. On the China fronts, the military campaign has marked time for nearly 15 months. Japan's one real triumph during this period was gained in South China. When Japan's forces occupied Nanning last November, they cut a Chinese supply road from French Indochina. From Nanning, they are also able to bomb the French railway into Yunnan province more easily. But this railway lies much farther inland and may possibly still be kept open. Japan's other routes to the outside world, the Burma-Yunnan highway and the overland route to Russia, are virtually unassailable. China, moreover, has itself won two important military victories in recent months. The first was at Changsha in October. The second has just been won in the south. 2 weeks ago, a strong Japanese offensive northward from Canton was routed. The Japanese forces engaged in this drive, including the Imperial Guards Division, have been steadily falling back on Canton before Chinese counterattacks. On the military side, Japan has no prospect of overcoming China's resistance in the near future. But time is important for Japan, which is facing economic difficulties. It is therefore making strenuous efforts on the political and diplomatic fronts. Plans for a new centralized Chinese government under Wang Jingwei, the one important Chinese leader who has deserted to Japan, have been approved. This new government may be inaugurated at Nanking early next month. It provides the thinnest screen for what is in fact Japanese control and domination. It could not exist for a week in China if the Japanese forces of occupation were withdrawn. But it serves a real purpose for Japan. It can be used to break down Free China's will to resist, as shown by Wang Jingwei's peace appeal to Chiang Kai-shek last Wednesday. If the Japanese could make an arrangement with the Western powers, leading to tacit recognition of Wang Jingwei's new regime, the political effects at Chongqing might be very serious, for maintenance of national unity is vital to China. If Chiang Kai-shek loses out on this front, then the military struggle is also lost. Japan's current negotiations with the Western powers, in other words, may determine the outcome in China. Japan is mainly concerned over the issue of its trade relations with the United States. On October 19th, the American ambassador Joseph C. Grew warned the Japanese people that American public opinion strongly resents some of the things that Japan's armed forces are doing in China today. Since then, Japan has met some of the American claims for damages in China. It has promised to reopen the Yangtze River to Nanking under certain restrictions at some future time. But it has not given up its efforts to establish full military political control over China. What policy should America follow? 10 days ago, Colonel Henry L. Stimson, former Secretary of State, presented the case for firm action against Japan. He pointed out that for 3 years the resources of the United States had continuously supported Japanese aggression in China, and that since the start of the European War, which absorbs Europe's war materials, this country is more than ever the principal source of Japan's supplies. He believed that the fear of war with Japan had no credible foundation, as demonstrated by Japan's more instead of less conciliatory attitude after Secretary Hull's abrogation of the trade treaty and Ambassador Grew's speech. He warned that the United States should beware of offering its efforts to force a peace upon China. He made two specific proposals. First, that Secretary Hull extend the moral embargo against Japan to include scrap iron, aviation gasoline, and iron ore. And second, that Congress prohibit the export to Japan of arms, munitions, and the raw materials of which arms are made. 2 days later, Mr. Walter Lippmann, in his syndicated column Today and Tomorrow, took issue with Colonel Stimson. He believed that it was wiser at this time to postpone the crisis and seek a modus vivendi with Japan, at least until Britain's navy was no longer challenged in the Atlantic. He maintained that an arm embargo would induce Japan to commit new aggressions, which in turn might lead to war with the United States. A congressional embargo, he thought, would be an open defiance of Japan. It should be adopted, he maintained, only if the United States was prepared to go to war to support it. The United States, said Mr. Lippman, could devise less challenging means of obstructing sales of war materials to Japan, and could play for time by getting along with Japan until the end of the European War, when a thoroughgoing Far Eastern settlement could be made. To some extent, the United States is already exerting pressure on Japan. More than a year ago, as a result of State Department representations, American aviation firms ceased exporting bombing planes to Japan. Just recently, this so-called moral embargo was extended to cover patents and plants for the manufacture of high-octane airplane gasoline, leading to the withdrawal of American engineers who were directing operation of large American-built cracking plants in Japan and in the Soviet Union. This country is still, however, selling large quantities of high-octane gasoline itself to Japan, a 2-million-gallon shipment having recently left San Pedro, California. Last Wednesday, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee decided to undertake a complete study of Japanese-American relations. Its chairman, Senator Pittman, has indicated that he might ask Secretary Hull and other State Department officials to attend the committee's first meeting after the trade treaty expires. At that meeting also, the committee will begin consideration of embargo proposals submitted during the regular congressional session last year. The measure sponsored by Senator Pittman himself rests the embargo on Japan's violation of the Nine-Power Treaty. It includes scrap iron and gasoline as well as munitions. The embargo, it should be noted, may be applied under various conditions and in various ways. It can be a mandatory enactment by Congress, taking effect automatically, or it can be discretionary, enabling the President to apply it if he sees fit, thus increasing the State Department's bargaining power with Japan. Finally, the embargo, if it is so desired, can be limited to but one or two products. In regard to scrap iron, for example, a good case on conservation grounds can be made out for a general measure, restricting its exportation to all countries. In this case, the embargo enactment would not even need to discriminate against Japan. But the embargo, involving some form of restriction on American exports to Japan, constitutes but one field of action. It is primarily a field of congressional action. The executive, in this case mainly the Treasury Department, has also its special sphere, in which it can levy restrictions on Japanese imports coming into this country. Most economic experts are inclined to favor this type of restriction because it reduces Japan's purchasing power at the source. The main possibilities of this would be four in number. First, depriving Japan of the benefits in reduced tariffs which it now enjoys as a most favored nation. As few of the whole trade treaties have markedly affected important Japanese products, this penalty would not be severe. Second, countervailing duties. These can be justified by certain methods of Japanese trading, which amount to subsidies for export. Third, a revenue duty on raw silk, now on the American Free Trade List. A 50% ad valorem duty on Japanese silk would produce something like $50 million annually for the American Treasury. Fourth, as an extreme measure, the Tariff Act could be invoked to deal with certain existing cases of Japanese trade discrimination against this country. Under various provisions of the Tariff Act, the President could levy high punitive duties on Japanese goods and on all goods imported in Japanese vessels. During the next few months, both Congress and the President will be considering these important issues in our Far Eastern policy. The decision is not easy, for failure to act may well prove, in the end, to have entailed risks as great as those involved in positive measures of restraint. The problem is also one for the American people, on which they must render their judgment.
You have been listening to Mr. A. Randall Elliott, Research Associate of the Foreign Policy Association, who spoke for Mr. T. A. Bisson in the series America Looks Abroad. In the world of today, foreign affairs are your affairs, and if you are interested in knowing the facts behind the headlines, send for a free copy of the weekly bulletin, written by the people you hear on this program and carrying an article by Mr. Bisson. Address your letter or postcard to the Foreign Policy Association, number 8 West 40th Street, New York City. This is the National Broadcasting Company.